She packed his lunch every single morning. She ironed his shirts. She kissed him goodbye at the door, and she believed, with everything in her, that the man walking out of that house loved her and only her. For 6 years, Renee Caldwell built her entire world around a marriage she thought was solid. And every morning, without fail, Marcus smiled before he left. Not a tired smile, not a distracted one. A full, warm, deliberate smile, the kind that made her feel chosen. The kind that made her stop worrying about the things that didn't quite add up. She would learn, far too late, that the smile wasn't for her. It never was. It was relief. And the morning she finally decided to follow him out of that door, everything she thought she knew collapsed in under 47 minutes. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing from our community. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now let's get back to Renee. Because what she found that Tuesday morning in Atlanta wasn't just another woman. What she found was an entire life, a house, a child, a history that Marcus had been quietly, carefully, and deliberately building right alongside the one he shared with her. And when the full picture finally came into focus, even the people closest to this family couldn't believe how deep the deception actually ran. Atlanta, Georgia, 2026. On the surface, the Caldwell household looked like exactly the kind of family you'd see featured in a church anniversary program. Marcus Caldwell, 47 years old, regional logistics manager, respected in his community, never missed a Sunday service. Renee Caldwell, 44, a high school guidance counselor who spent her days helping other people's children navigate hard truths. 2 kids, a 16-year-old daughter named Brianna and a 13-year-old son named Caleb. A 4-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood just outside of East Atlanta. By every visible measure, this was a family that had figured it out. Neighbors waved at them from driveways. Church members called Marcus a pillar. And Renee just kept showing up every single day for a marriage she had no idea was already living 2 lives. But here's what nobody in that neighborhood knew. For nearly 4 years, Marcus had been driving 22 minutes across the city, past the logistics hub he claimed to work out of, and pulling up to a beige brick house in East Point that his wife had never seen, never visited, and never once been told existed. A woman named Tanya was inside that house, and a little boy, 4 years old, bright-eyed, and running to the door the moment he heard that car pull up, was calling Marcus Daddy. Not stepdad, not uncle, Daddy. And Marcus, the same man who kissed Renee goodbye every morning with that wide, practiced smile, was scooping that child up like a man completely at peace with the world he had constructed. So tonight, we are asking 3 questions that this story forces every one of us to sit with. The first, how does a man maintain 2 families, 2 households, and 2 completely separate emotional lives for years without a single crack showing? The second, what was Marcus actually preparing for? Because as investigators and attorneys would later discover, the secret family was only part of what he had been building in the dark. And the third question is the one that will stay with you long after this video ends. When Renee finally saw the full picture, every hidden transaction, every document, every calculated move Marcus had made, was she looking at a man who had simply fallen into a double life? Or was she looking at something far colder than that? Stay with us, because this story does not go where you think it goes. Renee Caldwell was born and raised in Decatur, Georgia, the youngest of 4 children in a household where stability was not a given. It was something you fought for. Her mother, Gloria, worked 2 jobs for most of Renee's childhood. A hospital receptionist by day and a home health aide 3 evenings a week. Renee watched her mother carry that weight with quiet dignity, and it shaped her in ways she wouldn't fully understand until she was grown. She became someone who valued reliability above almost everything else. Someone who believed that if you committed to something, a career, a friendship, a marriage, you showed up for it completely. That belief was not naive. It was earned. It was the philosophy of a woman who had seen what it looked like when people didn't show up, and had decided very early that she would never be that person. She put herself through college at Georgia State, earned a degree in counseling psychology, and built a career helping teenagers in some of Atlanta's most underfunded public schools navigate crises that most adults wouldn't know how to handle. Grief, abuse, homelessness, academic failure on the edge of dropout. Renee sat across from those kids every single day and gave them something steady to hold on to. Her colleagues described her as unusually calm under pressure. Her students trusted her in ways they didn't trust their own parents. And the irony of that, a woman professionally gifted at reading people in pain, at spotting the signs others missed, is something that would haunt the people who loved her once the truth about Marcus came out. Because the signs were there. They had been there for a long time. And Renee, like so many women in her position, had talked herself out of every single one of them. She met Marcus Caldwell at a mutual friend's cookout in the summer of 2017. He was charming without being loud about it, attentive in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. He remembered details, what she said she was reading, what neighborhood she grew up in, the name of her mother. He called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up. For a woman whose earliest template of a man was one who consistently disappeared, Marcus felt like answered prayer. They dated for 18 months. He proposed on a Saturday morning in Piedmont Park, just the two of them, no audience, no elaborate production, which somehow made it feel more sincere. They married in the spring of 2019. Renee wore her mother's pearl earrings. Marcus cried at the altar. Everyone who was there that day would later say the same thing. It looked completely real. And for a while it was. The early years of the marriage were, by Renee's own account, genuinely good. They built routines together. Marcus coached youth basketball on Saturday mornings. Renee hosted a small women's Bible study at the house on Thursday evenings. They took the kids to Savannah every summer and argued pleasantly about where to eat dinner. Marcus was present, engaged. He fixed things around the house without being asked. He remembered anniversaries. He was the kind of husband other women pointed to quietly when their own relationships were struggling. And Renee knew that. She was proud of what they had built. She held on to that pride even as the small, unexplainable things began to accumulate, because she had worked too hard for that marriage to let a feeling she couldn't name tear it apart. The feeling started in 2025. Nothing dramatic. Nothing she could take to anyone and say, "Look, something is wrong." It was more like a shift in atmospheric pressure. Marcus's morning routine grew slightly more deliberate. He began leaving 5 minutes earlier than usual, which he attributed to new traffic patterns on the interstate. His phone, which had always sat face up on the kitchen counter, started going face down. He was never cold toward Renee, never short-tempered, never withdrawn in a way she could point to directly. He was still kind, still present at dinner, still smiling at that door every morning. But something behind the smile had changed texture. And Renee, who spent her professional life teaching young people to trust what they felt in their bodies before their minds caught up, felt it every single day. She just wasn't ready yet to follow where that feeling led. Was a Tuesday morning in March 2026. Renee had taken a personal day from work, something she almost never did. She hadn't planned anything specific for the day. No appointment, no errand that couldn't wait. She would tell her sister later that she didn't fully understand why she took that day off until the moment Marcus reached for his keys. He kissed her on the cheek. He straightened his jacket. And then he turned at the door and gave her that smile, the one she had seen 10,000 times. And something in Renee's chest locked into place like a decision that had already been made somewhere below conscious thought. She didn't say anything. She waited until she heard his car back out of the driveway. She counted to 30. And then she picked up her own keys, walked to her car, and pulled out onto the street, 3 vehicles behind him. She had never followed her husband before. She wanted to be clear about that, to herself, to her sister, and eventually to the attorney who would sit across from her and listen to all of it. This was not a pattern of suspicion. This was not the behavior of a woman who had been tracking her husband for months. This was one morning, one decision made in the space of 30 seconds. And she almost turned around twice before she reached the interstate, telling herself she was being irrational, that she was about to feel foolish, that Marcus was going to pull into the logistics hub parking lot, and she was going to drive home and spend the rest of her personal day embarrassed and relieved in equal measure. She didn't turn around. She kept 3 cars between them, and she followed him onto I-285 heading southwest. He did not take the exit for the logistics hub. Renee noted that without reacting. She kept her breathing steady and her distance consistent. The way you hold yourself together when part of you already knows what you're about to find and the other part is still negotiating. Marcus drove 22 minutes from their front door. He exited into a residential neighborhood in East Point, a quiet, unremarkable stretch of streets lined with modest brick homes and old oak trees, and pulled into the driveway of a beige house with white shutters and a child's red bicycle leaning against the front porch railing. Renee parked across the street and 2 houses down. She cut her engine, and she watched. She did not have to wait long. Marcus had barely reached the front steps when the door opened from the inside. Before he knocked, before he rang anything, opened by a woman in her early 30s wearing a gray sweatshirt, comfortable and unhurried, the way you open a door for someone whose footsteps you already recognize. She stepped aside to let him in with the easy familiarity of a person who has done this hundreds of times. And then, from somewhere deeper inside the house, Renee heard it, the sound no wife in that situation is ever prepared for. The sound of small, running feet. And a little boy, 4 years old, maybe 5, in blue pajamas with cartoon rockets on them, came barreling through the door and launched himself at Marcus with both arms in the air. Marcus caught him, laughing, fully, openly, completely laughing, in a way Renee realized, sitting in that car, she had not seen him laugh in a very long time. She sat there for 47 minutes. She did not call anyone. She did not cry. She would cry later, in the shower that night, with the water running loud enough that Brianna and Caleb wouldn't hear her through the walls. But in that car, in that moment, Renee Caldwell did what she had always done under pressure. She got quiet. She got clear. She watched the house until Marcus reappeared on the porch, kissed the woman briefly, and drove away in the direction of the logistics hub, as though he were simply running a few minutes late for a completely ordinary workday. Renee sat for another 10 minutes after his car disappeared. Then she pulled out her phone. She did not call Marcus. She opened her notes app, typed the address of the house, the name on the mailbox, the license plate of a second car parked in the driveway, and the approximate age of the child in the blue pajamas. And then she drove home. Because Renee Caldwell was not a woman who made moves before she understood exactly what she was dealing with. And what she was dealing with, she already knew, was far bigger than one morning, one woman, and one little boy in rocket pajamas. Renee did not confront Marcus that night, or the night after that, or the one after that. She sat across from him at the dinner table, passed him the bread basket, listened to him ask Caleb about basketball practice, and watched Brianna show him a college brochure she had picked up from school, and Marcus engaged with all of it warmly, attentively, completely. He was, by every visible measure, fully present. And Renee sat there and let him perform it, because she had made a decision in that car in East Point that she was not going to move until she understood the complete shape of what she was looking at. Reacting too soon, she knew, was how women in her position lost everything. So she smiled back at dinner. She said goodnight. And after Marcus fell asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and started pulling at every thread she could find. The name on the mailbox at the East Point house had been partially visible from where she was parked, enough to work with. Within 2 evenings of careful searching through public records available online, Renee had a full name. Tanya Graves, 33 years old, currently listed as the primary resident at that address. The property lease, accessible through county records, had been co-signed 4 years earlier by a man listed under the name Marcus D. Caldwell, Marcus's first and middle initial, his last name, all legitimate, just transposed slightly in the way a person transposes things when they want plausible deniability but still need their real signature to hold up on a legal document. Renee stared at that co-signature for a long time. Because it told her something important, this was not impulsive. Whatever Marcus had built in that house in East Point, he had built it deliberately, with paperwork, with planning, and with his own name attached to it. She called her older sister Doris on a Thursday evening while Marcus was at a church board meeting. She told her everything. The follow, the house, the child, the lease, the co-signature. Doris, who had never particularly warmed to Marcus in the way the rest of the family had, listened without interrupting until Renee was finished. And then she said 4 words that would redirect the entire course of what happened next. She said, "Do not tell him. Not yet. Get an attorney first." Renee had been thinking about confronting Marcus that weekend. Doris's response stopped her completely. Because Doris understood something Renee was still too close to the situation to see clearly. A man who had been operating this carefully, for this long, had almost certainly thought about what happened when he got caught. And if Renee walked into that conversation unprepared, she would be handing Marcus the advantage in a situation where she could not afford to lose any ground. She contacted a family law attorney named Angela Tate the following Monday morning, calling from her car during her lunch break, engine running, parked 2 streets away from her school so none of her colleagues would see her. Angela had 15 years of experience handling high-asset divorce cases in the Atlanta metro area, and she had heard a version of this story before. But when Renee laid out what she had already found, the lease co-signature, the child, the address, the second car registered to a company name she didn't recognize, Angela asked her to come in that week. Because the detail about the company name was not something she wanted to discuss over the phone. That detail, Angela told her at their first meeting, needed to be investigated carefully before Renee said a single word to her husband. It was the first moment Renee understood that what she had stumbled into was not simply a matter of betrayal. It was a matter of financial architecture. The company registration came back within days through Angela's investigative contacts. A limited liability company, registered in Georgia 18 months prior, under a name that had no obvious connection to Marcus on the surface, but whose registered agent, listed in state business filings, shared a post office box number with a separate account. Angela's team traced directly back to Marcus's personal financial history. The second car parked in Tanya's driveway was registered under this LLC. And when Angela's team pulled the financial thread further, what unraveled was a pattern of consistent monthly cash withdrawals from a secondary account Renee had no knowledge of. Withdrawals that had been happening for nearly 3 years, averaging a total that, calculated across that entire period, represented tens of thousands of dollars moved quietly and deliberately out of the Caldwell family's financial picture. Renee sat in Angela's office and looked at the printed summary of those figures. She had come in looking for proof of an affair. What she was looking at now was something far more calculated than that. A neighbor of Tanya Graves, contacted carefully by Angela's investigator, mentioned something in passing that added one final, deeply unsettling layer to the emerging picture. She said that on several occasions over the past year, she had seen a man arriving at the East Point house not in the silver SUV Renee had followed that Tuesday morning, but in a different vehicle entirely. A dark blue sedan she had never seen in the neighborhood before or after those visits. When the investigator ran the partial plate description the neighbor provided, it came back registered to the same LLC. Marcus had not one but 2 vehicles connected to that company. 2 cars, 1 house, 1 child, 1 woman, and a financial structure that had been quietly, methodically constructed around all of it, while Renee packed his lunch, ironed his shirts, and trusted that smile at the door every single morning. Renee had been sitting on everything for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of dinner table conversations and Sunday mornings and goodnight kisses. 3 weeks of watching Marcus move through their home with the same unhurried confidence he had always carried, completely unaware that the woman beside him had spent every spare moment of that time methodically documenting the life he had built without her. Angela had advised patience. The financial picture needed to be fully mapped before Renee made any move that would alert Marcus to what she knew. Because once he knew, the clock would start. And a man careful enough to build what Marcus had built would not waste a single minute of that clock once it began. So Renee waited. She gathered. She held herself together with a discipline that her attorney would later describe as one of the most composed responses she had seen from a client in 15 years of family law practice. The confrontation happened on a Saturday evening in early April 2026. Brianna was at a friend's house. Caleb was at a basketball clinic across town. Marcus was in the living room watching television when Renee came in, sat down across from him, and placed a manila folder on the coffee table between them. Inside that folder was the lease co-signature, the LLC registration, the printed bank withdrawal summaries, a photograph, taken by Angela's investigator, of Marcus arriving at the East Point house, and a copy of a document that Angela's team had obtained through official channels, Elijah Marcus Graves' birth certificate, filed with the state of Georgia 4 years earlier, listing Marcus Darnell Caldwell as the child's father. Renee did not say anything when she put the folder down. She sat back and waited, and Marcus looked at the folder for a long moment before he looked at her. He did not deny it. That was the first thing that struck her. There was no performance of shock, no reaching for an explanation, no attempt to reframe what was sitting right there in black and white between them. Marcus Caldwell looked at his wife across that coffee table, and he went very, very quiet. And then, After almost a full minute of silence, he said he was sorry. Not the fractured, desperate apology of a man caught off guard. A measured apology. Calm. Contained. Delivered in the careful tone of a man who had thought about this moment and had already decided how he would handle it when it arrived. Renee told her sister afterward that the apology was the most frightening thing she had ever heard in her life, because it sounded rehearsed. And a man who had rehearsed his apology had not spent that time feeling remorse. He had spent it preparing. And then Marcus told her something that reoriented everything Renee thought she understood about the timeline she was working with. He told her that he had known for 3 weeks that she had been outside Tanya's house that Tuesday morning in March. Tanya had called him the same evening and told him that a woman in a dark car had been parked across the street for nearly an hour. Marcus had not known for certain it was Renee, but he had suspected it immediately, and rather than come home and address it, he had spent those 3 weeks doing exactly what Angela had feared he would do. He had already spoken to his own attorney. He had already begun the process of repositioning assets connected to the LLC. He had already, quietly and efficiently, started building his exit from the Caldwell household on his own terms, before Renee had the chance to build hers. The news hit Angela's office the following morning like a case that had just changed shape entirely. Because if Marcus had been moving assets for 3 weeks, the financial picture her team had mapped was no longer current. An emergency motion was filed within 48 hours to freeze the relevant accounts pending divorce proceedings. But the deeper damage was not entirely undoable. Marcus had been strategic, not reckless. He had not stripped accounts in ways that would be obvious to a court. He had made incremental moves, quiet transfers, adjustments that individually looked like routine financial activity and collectively told a very different story. Angela looked at Renee across her desk and told her honestly, they would recover most of it. But Marcus had bought himself time. And time, in a case like this, had been the whole point. Brianna found out that same weekend. Not because Renee sat her down. She wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Brianna found out the way teenagers find out things their parents are trying to protect them from. She came home early from her friend's house, walked into a living room where her father was still sitting with that open folder on the coffee table between them, and read the room in the way that 16-year-olds with emotionally intelligent mothers learn to read rooms. She didn't ask what was in the folder. She looked at her father's face and then at her mother's, and she walked straight to her room and closed the door without a word. Renee found her sitting on her bed an hour later, not crying, just staring at the wall with an expression that Renee recognized immediately, because it was the same expression she had worn in that car in East Point. The expression of someone who already knew, and was just now allowing themselves to know it fully. The divorce proceedings began in May 2026. Marcus retained one of the more aggressive family law firms in the Atlanta metro area, a choice that surprised no one who had been paying attention to how methodically he had handled everything else. His legal team's opening position was built around the LLC. They argued that the family home carried a partial financial encumbrance connected to the company's activity, a technical claim designed not necessarily to succeed in court, but to complicate the asset division process long enough to create negotiating leverage. It was a calculated move. The kind of move you make when you have already accepted that you are going to lose the larger argument, and you are simply trying to control how much you lose in the process. Angela had seen the strategy before. She had prepared for it, and she dismantled it methodically over the course of 2 months of proceedings, using the very financial records Marcus's own LLC had generated. The court did not accept the encumbrance argument. The family home was awarded to Renee. Primary custody of Brianna and Caleb went to Renee, with structured visitation rights for Marcus, rights that both teenagers, when asked by the court-appointed guardian ad litem to express their preferences, indicated they were not certain they wanted him to exercise. Caleb, 13 years old, told the guardian he didn't understand why his father had a whole other kid he had never told them about. Brianna said nothing in her session that the guardian was able to share in open proceedings. But those who were present said she sat straight-backed in that chair and answered every question with a composure that reminded people in the room of her mother. Marcus was also ordered to pay child support for Elijah, the 4-year-old son he had fathered with Tanya Graves, in addition to spousal and child support obligations to Renee and their children. 2 households he had built. Now 2 households the court was holding him accountable for. But it was what Angela's team uncovered during the discovery process that stopped everyone in that case cold. Buried inside the financial documentation subpoenaed from Marcus's personal accounts and the LLC was a record that had not appeared in any of the initial investigation. 18 months before Renee followed her husband across the city on that Tuesday morning in March. 18 months before any of this came into the open, Marcus had updated the beneficiary designation on a life insurance policy he carried. The policy itself was not unusual. What was unusual was the amount, $200,000. And the updated beneficiary was not Renee. It was not Brianna or Caleb. The updated beneficiary was the LLC, which, as Angela's team had already established, was effectively controlled by Marcus alone. The policy had been taken out on Renee's life, and it had been quietly updated at almost exactly the same time Marcus had registered the LLC and begun moving money out of their shared accounts. No criminal charges were filed. Investigators who reviewed the policy update found no direct documented evidence of intent beyond financial repositioning. And in the state of Georgia, updating a life insurance beneficiary, even to an LLC you control, is not in itself a criminal act. The case remains civil, but the revelation of that policy transformed the emotional texture of everything that had come before it. Because suddenly the timeline told a different story. The LLC formed. The secondary accounts opened. The assets quietly moved. And a life insurance policy on his wife, updated and redirected, all within the same 18-month window. Renee had walked out of her front door one morning thinking she was following her husband to find an affair. What the documents laid out in that courtroom suggested was a man who had been constructing a future, carefully, quietly, piece by piece, that did not include her in it at all. Renee Caldwell is still in the family home today. Brianna is in her senior year and has already been accepted to 2 universities. Caleb made the starting lineup on his school's basketball team this past winter, a fact that Renee mentioned to her sister with the kind of quiet pride that carries everything unsaid inside it. Renee went back to work 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She still sits across from teenagers every day and helps them navigate things that feel unsurvivable. Her colleagues say she is somehow even steadier than she was before. More patient, less startled by the gap between how things look and how they actually are. She told one close friend that the hardest part was not the betrayal itself, as devastating as that was. The hardest part was reconciling the man she had known with the man the documents described. Because those 2 men had lived inside the same body, worn the same face, and smiled at her from the same doorway every single morning for 6 years. Marcus Caldwell relocated to a rental property in a different part of the city following the divorce. He exercises his visitation rights on a reduced schedule that reflects where things stand with his children. Whether he and Tanya Graves remain together is not something the public record confirms. What the public record does confirm is the full inventory of what he built and what it cost. 2 families, 1 hidden financial structure, and a life insurance policy that will follow this story for as long as people talk about it. There is a version of this case where Marcus is simply a weak man who made selfish choices and kept making them because nobody stopped him. There is another version, the one that documents point to, where the choices were never impulsive at all. Where everything, from the LLC to the policy to the practiced apology on that Saturday evening, was part of a plan that Renee interrupted simply by trusting a feeling she had been talking herself out of for months. That is the question this story leaves behind. Not whether Marcus was guilty of betrayal, that was never in dispute. The question is what kind of man plans for his wife's absence before she even knows she's supposed to leave. And the deeper question, the one that keeps women who hear this story awake at night, is this. The signs were there. The small inconsistencies, the face-down phone, the slightly earlier departures, the smile that had changed texture without changing shape. Renee was a trained counselor, a woman professionally skilled at reading people in distress, and she still talked herself out of what she felt for months because she loved him, because she had built something real with him, and because the mind protects us from what the heart is not yet ready to carry. So before you judge her for not seeing it sooner, ask yourself honestly, would you have seen it? Would you have followed him? Or would you have kept packing the lunch, ironing the shirt, and trusting the smile at the door? Drop your answer in the comments below. This story deserves that conversation. And if you are watching this and something in it felt uncomfortably familiar, trust what you feel. Renee wishes she had. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because the next story we are covering is one that starts with a woman who thought she had the perfect life. Right up until the morning, she found something in her husband's car that no wife should ever have to find. You do not want to miss that one.